Failure was never the problem. The belief attached to it was. The moment failure was labeled as damage, hesitation was born. Action slowed, decisions softened, and risk began asking for permission. Not because ability disappeared, but because meaning was distorted. Failure was treated as evidence of limitation instead of information for correction. Each misstep became a warning instead of a guide. Progress didn't stop because failure happened. Progress stopped because failure was misinterpreted. Success does not reject failure. Success uses it. Every effective path forward contains misalignment, friction, and correction built directly into its structure. Without those signals, improvement has no direction. Without resistance, growth has no precision. Failure exposes what works by showing exactly what does not. It reveals gaps in execution, not flaws in identity. It sharpens judgment instead of weakening confidence when it is understood correctly. Avoiding failure feels safe, but it quietly builds stagnation. Engaging with failure builds clarity, momentum, and control. This is not about embracing mistakes emotionally. This is about using them strategically. The moment failure is reclassified, fear loses authority. Decisions become cleaner. Action becomes faster. Learning becomes unavoidable. If failure has been treated as a liability, then progress has been delayed unnecessarily. If that belief is removed, success stops being a mystery and becomes a process. This is where the process begins. Chapter 1. Failure is not the problem. Failure has been blamed for stagnation, hesitation, and diminished confidence, even though it never caused them. What caused them was the interpretation assigned to failure, not the event itself or its consequences. Failure was treated as a verdict on identity rather than a data point, demanding adjustment and continuation. That framing quietly trained the mind to retreat whenever outcomes failed to match expectation or effort. Each setback was recorded internally as evidence of insufficiency, instead of feedback requiring discipline and refinement. Over time, that pattern created an internal environment where risk felt dangerous and consistency felt optional. The problem was never falling short, missing targets, or experiencing resistance from reality itself. The problem was allowing those moments to redefine self-trust and internal authority. Failure does not remove capacity, potential, or worth, but misinterpretation removes momentum with precision. Every meaningful pursuit requires repeated friction, delayed rewards, and periods where progress feels invisible. Those periods are not warnings to stop, but signals that deeper commitment and structure are required. Growth has never been polite, encouraging, or considerate of emotional preference or mental comfort. Growth demands continued execution long after enthusiasm has expired and confidence has gone quiet. When failure occurs, the disciplined response is not emotional processing, self-judgment, or motivational searching. The disciplined response is immediate recalibration, controlled reflection, and decisive forward movement. Instead, failure was allowed to become a place of rest, reflection without action, and identity questioning. That rest slowly turned into delay, and delay slowly turned into a lifestyle that felt justified. Comfort was found in analysis, preparation, and planning, while execution remained postponed indefinitely. Failure did not create this pattern, permission did, and permission was given too easily. Permission to stop trying temporarily, permission to wait for better energy, permission to avoid discomfort. Every time that permission was granted, authority shifted away from discipline and toward emotion. Emotion does not build anything stable, repeatable, or resilient under pressure. Emotion reacts, resists, and withdraws the moment effort feels unappreciated or uncertain. Discipline continues regardless of recognition, reassurance, or immediate visible progress. Failure exposes the gap between intention and structure, not the absence of capability. That gap can only be closed through repetition, correction, and sustained engagement with resistance. Avoiding failure guarantees stagnation, while engaging failure guarantees information and refinement. The mind must be retrained to associate failure with instruction rather than threat or humiliation. Every attempt that falls short sharpens awareness, precision, and internal toughness when handled correctly. Failure handled poorly weakens resolve, but failure handled properly builds unshakable internal authority. The difference is not circumstance, luck, or talent, but the standard enforced after falling short. Standards determine whether failure becomes fuel or poison. Lower standards seek comfort, explanations, and external validation after setbacks. Higher standards demand correction, recommitment, and immediate return to disciplined action. Failure does not ask for emotional response. It demands operational response. Operational response means identifying what failed, adjusting behavior, and executing again without delay. That process builds resilience quietly, without dramatic breakthroughs or motivational surges. Resilience is constructed through repetition under pressure, not emotional recovery or positive thinking. Every disciplined return after failure strengthens identity as someone who continues regardless of outcome. That identity eventually replaces fear, hesitation, and dependence on motivation. Once that shift occurs, failure loses its power to intimidate, delay, or discourage. Failure becomes expected, neutral, and even necessary for sustained growth. Growth without failure is shallow, fragile, and unsustainable under real-world pressure. Avoidance creates fragile confidence that collapses the moment resistance appears. Engagement creates grounded confidence that survives uncertainty, criticism, and slow progress. Failure is not a liability, but avoidance always is. Avoidance compounds regret, stagnation, and disconnection from personal standards. Failure compounds competence, clarity, and internal control when met with discipline. The choice is not whether failure will occur, because it already has and will again. The choice is whether failure will instruct or imprison. That decision is made after each setback, not through intention, but through action. Action taken despite disappointment restores authority faster than any internal dialogue ever could. Authority is rebuilt through behavior, not belief or reassurance. Every disciplined response to failure rewrites internal expectations about what happens after falling short. Those expectations determine whether progress continues or quietly stalls again. Failure is not the problem. The refusal to continue after failure is the only real obstacle here. Chapter 2. Discipline when motivation is dead. Motivation has been relied upon as if it were a dependable resource, even though it has never been stable or obedient. It arrives unpredictably, leaves without warning, and rarely aligns with moments when action is most required. Depending on motivation has quietly trained inconsistency, because effort became conditional instead of enforced. When energy dropped or confidence faded, execution was postponed until the internal environment felt more cooperative. That cooperation rarely returned on schedule, and time continued advancing without regard for internal readiness. Discipline exists specifically for moments when motivation is absent, depleted, or entirely silent. It does not negotiate with feelings, and it does not wait for clarity, excitement, or emotional alignment. Discipline operates on decision, structure, and obligation, regardless of internal resistance or mental noise. When motivation dies, discipline is not weakened. It is finally given room to operate properly. Motivation seeks comfort and reward, while discipline seeks completion and consistency. One depends on emotional fuel, the other depends on commitment to standards already chosen. Standards enforced without motivation build a form of confidence that does not fluctuate with mood or outcome. That confidence is quieter, heavier, and far more reliable under pressure. Most stagnation does not come from lack of desire, intelligence, or opportunity. It comes from refusal to act without emotional support or internal encouragement. That refusal has been disguised as self-care, patience, or waiting for the right moment. The right moment does not appear when motivation returns. It appears when discipline is applied anyway. Acting without motivation feels heavier, slower, and less rewarding in the short term. That discomfort is not a sign of misalignment. It is evidence of growth occurring without emotional padding. Growth without motivation strengthens internal authority more than motivated effort ever could. Motivated action teaches reliance on feeling good before acting. Disciplined action teaches acting well regardless of feeling anything at all. The second creates reliability. The first creates volatility. Reliability compounds into trust both internally and externally. Through repeated follow-through, that trust changes identity quietly, without announcement or dramatic transformation. Identity shifts when behavior remains consistent under conditions that previously caused withdrawal. Motivation often disguises avoidance because action feels easier when excitement is present. Discipline removes that disguise by demanding execution even when everything feels resistant. Resistance is not a warning sign. It is the environment where discipline proves its value. Avoiding resistance delays growth and reinforces dependence on emotional readiness. Meeting resistance repeatedly conditions the mind to function under less than ideal conditions. That conditioning is what allows progress during exhaustion, uncertainty, and discouragement. Waiting to feel ready is an unspoken agreement to remain where things already are. Readiness is built through action, not discovered through reflection or mental preparation. Every disciplined action taken while unmotivated rewires expectations about capability. Capability stops being associated with mood and starts being associated with decision. Decision does not require enthusiasm, only commitment to follow through. Follow through, executed repeatedly, creates momentum that does not rely on emotion. That momentum feels different, slower initially, but far more durable over time. Durable momentum survives setbacks, criticism, slow progress, and extended periods without reward. Motivation collapses under those conditions. Discipline strengthens. Discipline practiced without motivation builds tolerance for delayed gratification. Delayed gratification is the foundation of any meaningful progress that lasts. Immediate reward conditions the mind to abandon effort when rewards disappear. Delayed reward conditions the mind to persist without external validation. Validation has been treated as fuel, even though it has never been guaranteed. When validation disappears, many efforts quietly stop without formal decision. Discipline does not require recognition to continue because the standard exists internally. Internal standards remove dependency on praise, feedback, or acknowledgement. That independence restores control over direction, pace, and outcome. Control does not mean certainty. It means consistency of action regardless of outcome. Outcome obsession undermines discipline by shifting focus away from process. Process, sustained without motivation, produces results that appear sudden from the outside. Those results were never sudden. They were delayed consequences of quiet consistency. Discipline executed daily while unmotivated feels invisible and unrewarding. That invisibility is why most abandon it before it compounds. Compounding requires time spent doing unremarkable work without emotional reinforcement. That work strengthens patience, focus, and resistance tolerance simultaneously. Resistance tolerance determines how long effort continues when conditions deteriorate. When conditions improve, those who endured have already built distance. Motivation returns eventually, but by then, discipline should already be leading. Motivation can assist, but it must never be in control again. Allowing motivation to lead creates cycles of intensity followed by collapse. Discipline creates steady output that survives fluctuations in energy and confidence. Energy will always fluctuate. Confidence will always waver. Circumstances will always change. Structure must remain stable while everything else moves unpredictably. Structure enforced daily reduces decision fatigue and emotional negotiation. Negotiation drains energy faster than effort itself. Discipline removes negotiation by enforcing action as non-optional. Non-optional action removes internal debate and restores forward motion. Forward motion, even slow, prevents stagnation from taking root again. Stagnation is rarely dramatic. It is quiet, comfortable, and rationalized. Discipline disrupts comfort before stagnation becomes identity. Every day, action occurs without motivation weakens the habit of delay. Delay feels harmless short-term, but destructive when accumulated. Accumulated delay produces regret that motivation cannot repair. Discipline prevents that accumulation by enforcing daily engagement. Engagement does not guarantee immediate success, but it guarantees development. Development compounds regardless of external outcome or recognition. Motivation fades. Discipline remains. When motivation is dead, discipline is not optional. It is the only path forward. That path feels heavier at first, but it leads somewhere real. Anything built without discipline collapses the moment motivation disappears. Anything built with discipline survives long after motivation is gone. Discipline is not punishment. It is self-respect enforced through action. Self-respect built this way cannot be taken by circumstance or failure. It becomes internal proof that action continues regardless of feeling. That proof restores confidence quietly, without affirmation or encouragement. Confidence earned this way is grounded, controlled, and difficult to shake. Motivation may return, but discipline must remain in command. Chapter 3. Failure trains what success demands. Success demands internal qualities that comfort never develops and ease never produces. Those qualities are pressure tolerance, decision stability, delayed gratification, and controlled persistence. Failure is the environment where those qualities are trained repeatedly without negotiation. Without failure, success would be unmanageable, unstable, and quickly dismantled by resistance. Failure exposes gaps between intention and execution that success often hides temporarily. Those gaps are not flaws to be avoided, but instructions waiting to be addressed through correction. Every failed attempt reveals weaknesses that would later collapse larger responsibility if ignored. Failure arrives early to prevent greater damage later when stakes are higher and margins are smaller. Avoiding failure delays this training and leaves critical weaknesses unaddressed. Unaddressed weaknesses eventually surface under pressure and cause abrupt collapse. Failure prepares the nervous system to operate without panic when outcomes are uncertain. Repeated exposure to setback conditions the mind to remain functional instead of reactive. Reaction wastes energy, clarity, and time, while controlled response preserves direction. Failure forces decision-making under imperfect conditions where clarity is limited. That training is essential because success rarely arrives with certainty or reassurance. Those who have not failed enough freeze when outcomes become ambiguous or unpredictable. Failure teaches how to move forward without full confidence or complete information. That ability separates those who sustain progress from those who stall under pressure. Every failure strengthens the ability to detach action from outcome temporarily. Detachment prevents emotional volatility from disrupting execution. Emotional volatility makes success unstable and difficult to maintain. Failure trains consistency by removing expectation of immediate reward. When reward disappears, only structure remains to guide action. Structure built during failure carries effort through success without collapse. Success without prior failure often produces entitlement instead of discipline. Entitlement expects reward without sustained effort and resists correction. Failure removes entitlement by enforcing humility through repeated correction. Humility developed through failure keeps attention on process rather than praise. Process focus is what sustains success after novelty fades. Failure trains patience by forcing continued effort without visible progress. Patience is required because meaningful success rarely aligns with preferred timelines. Those untrained in patient sabotage progress by changing direction prematurely. Failure conditions tolerance for slow progress without abandoning commitment. Slow progress sustained eventually outpaces inconsistent bursts of motivated effort. Failure also trains accurate self-assessment by exposing limits that imagination exaggerates. Accurate self-assessment prevents overextension and reckless decision-making. Recklessness feels bold, but often undermines long-term stability. Failure tempers ambition with realism without extinguishing drive. That balance allows ambition to be executed sustainably. Failure strengthens problem-solving ability by forcing repeated adjustment. Adjustment becomes habitual instead of threatening. Those unfamiliar with failure resist adjustment and cling to ineffective approaches. Rigid attachment to failing methods guarantees stagnation. Failure teaches flexibility without surrendering standards. Flexibility allows adaptation, while discipline preserves direction. That combination is essential for navigating complex yet unpredictable environments. Failure also reveals whether commitment is conditional or absolute. Conditional commitment disappears when effort becomes uncomfortable. Absolute commitment persists regardless of immediate outcome. Success requires absolute commitment long before results justify it. Failure exposes commitment early so it can be strengthened deliberately. Failure trains emotional regulation by repeatedly triggering disappointment without collapse. Emotional regulation prevents impulsive decisions driven by frustration or fear. Those decisions often undo months of disciplined effort. Failure also prepares identity for responsibility. Responsibility requires tolerance for criticism, uncertainty, and delayed validation. Failure provides controlled exposure to all three. Avoiding failure leaves identity fragile and dependent on external approval. Fragile identity cannot carry sustained success without constant reassurance. Failure removes dependence on reassurance by proving continuation is possible without it. That proof builds internal authority that success later relies upon. Success amplifies whatever internal structure already exists. If discipline exists, success strengthens it. If avoidance exists, success exposes it. Failure ensures the structure is strong before amplification occurs. Failure is preparation disguised as setback. Every lesson failure delivers reduces future damage under greater pressure. Ignoring those lessons guarantees repeated collapse at higher levels. Failure is not punishment. It is rehearsal. Rehearsal builds competence quietly, without recognition or applause. Competence built this way survives exposure and scrutiny. Those who reject failure remain unprepared for the weight of success. Failure trains what success demands, whether acknowledged or not. Resisting failure delays readiness. Engaging failure accelerates preparation. Failure is not an obstacle on the path to success. Failure is the training ground that makes success survivable. Chapter 4. Failure strips illusions. Failure removes illusions that comfort carefully protects and preserves without challenge. Illusions about readiness, talent, timing, and deserved outcomes quietly distort decision-making. Those illusions feel harmless until responsibility increases and pressure exposes structural weakness. Failure intervenes early by dismantling false confidence before it causes irreversible damage. Confidence built without testing collapses when reality refuses cooperation. Failure applies that test repeatedly until accuracy replaces imagination. Illusions thrive in environments where effort has not been fully demanded. Failure demands full engagement and reveals exactly where preparation is insufficient. That revelation feels uncomfortable because it disrupts preferred self-perception. Discomfort is not harm. It is correction occurring in real time. Failure strips the illusion that effort alone guarantees outcome. Effort without precision produces exhaustion without progress. Failure exposes inefficiencies that enthusiasm often hides temporarily. Removing inefficiency allows energy to be redirected toward effective action. Failure dismantles the illusion of control over timing. Timing rarely aligns with expectation, preference, or emotional readiness. Failure teaches patience by refusing immediate results regardless of urgency. Patience developed this way becomes operational instead of theoretical. Operational patience sustains action without resentment or withdrawal. Failure removes the illusion that clarity must precede movement. Clarity often emerges only after repeated attempts expose what does not work. Waiting for clarity delays engagement and preserves uncertainty. Failure clarifies direction through elimination, not inspiration. Each unsuccessful attempt narrows options and sharpens focus. That narrowing accelerates progress once illusions are removed. Failure dismantles the illusion that comfort is compatible with growth. Growth requires friction, discomfort, and sustained tension. Comfort encourages maintenance of current identity rather than expansion. Failure disrupts comfort by forcing confrontation with limits. Those limits are not fixed, but they must be acknowledged before expansion occurs. Failure removes the illusion of uniqueness. Struggle feels personal, but it follows predictable patterns. Recognizing those patterns prevents isolation and self-judgment. Failure normalizes difficulty by proving resistance is part of the process. That normalization prevents emotional overreaction when obstacles appear. Failure strips the illusion that success arrives cleanly. Success emerges through disorder, correction, and repeated misalignment. Expecting clean progress causes disappointment and unnecessary hesitation. Failure corrects that expectation by exposing the true nature of advancement. Failure dismantles the illusion that external validation confirms progress. Validation is inconsistent and often delayed beyond usefulness. Failure forces reliance on internal standards instead. Internal standards stabilize effort when recognition disappears. Failure removes the illusion that strength feels powerful. Strength often feels heavy, restrained, and quiet. Failure teaches functioning without dramatic emotional signals. That lesson prevents dependency on feeling strong to act effectively. Failure strips the illusion that rest solves structural problems. Rest restores energy, but it does not correct ineffective behavior. Failure demands behavioral change, not recovery alone. Failure removes the illusion that avoiding mistakes preserves confidence. Avoidance preserves comfort, not capability. Capability is built by encountering errors and correcting them deliberately. Failure exposes error quickly and repeatedly. Correction applied consistently transforms error into competence. Failure strips the illusion that progress must be visible to be real. Much of growth occurs internally before external results appear. Failure forces trust in process rather than appearance. Trust built this way survives delayed outcomes. Failure removes the illusion that effort should feel rewarding. Reward often arrives long after effort is invested. Failure conditions tolerance for unrewarded effort. That tolerance enables sustained engagement during extended development periods. Failure dismantles the illusion that identity is fixed. Identity shifts through repeated behavior under pressure. Failure provides that pressure consistently. Each response to failure reinforces or weakens identity. Choosing correction strengthens identity. Choosing avoidance weakens it. Failure removes ambiguity by forcing decision. Decision restores agency that illusion quietly erodes. Agency allows ownership of direction regardless of circumstance. Failure strips the illusion that circumstances determine outcome. Circumstances influence difficulty, not responsibility. Failure reinforces responsibility by refusing excuses. Excuses dissolve under repeated exposure to consequence. Failure dismantles the illusion that confidence precedes competence. Competence earned through failure produces durable confidence. That confidence does not inflate, it stabilizes. Failure removes inflated self-perception and replaces it with grounded capability. Grounded capability adapts instead of resists. Resistance to correction preserves illusion at the cost of progress. Failure insists on correction regardless of preference. Preference loses authority when results matter. Failure strips illusion until only truth remains actionable. Truth allows accurate adjustment and continued advancement. Without illusion, effort becomes efficient and directed. Failure is not destructive when illusions are released. Failure becomes instructional when illusions are removed. Illusions delay growth. Failure accelerates it by stripping them away. Chapter 5. Failure builds internal authority. Internal authority is not granted by confidence, affirmation, or external recognition. It is earned through repeated decision-making under pressure where continuation is chosen deliberately. Failure creates those conditions consistently and without accommodation. Each encounter with failure demands a response that either strengthens or weakens self-command. Choosing to continue after failure reinforces authority more effectively than any successful outcome. Success can inflate perception, but failure tests control without distortion. Internal authority grows when action is taken despite disappointment, doubt, or emotional resistance. That authority is behavioral, not emotional or intellectual. Behavior repeated under pressure rewrites identity expectations quietly. Failure exposes whether direction is externally driven or internally enforced. External drivers collapse when feedback turns negative or progress slows. Internal authority remains steady, regardless of response from outside. Failure removes dependence on approval by forcing solitary commitment. Solitary commitment builds self-trust that does not require validation. That self-trust becomes the foundation for leadership over personal decisions. Leadership begins internally before it is ever visible externally. Failure trains leadership by requiring choice without reassurance. Reassurance delays decision-making and weakens execution. Failure does not reassure. It demands action without comfort. That demand strengthens decisiveness over time. Decisiveness eliminates hesitation that drains energy and focus. Failure repeatedly confronts hesitation and exposes its cost. Each delayed response compounds consequence and erodes momentum. Failure teaches that indecision is more damaging than incorrect action. Incorrect action produces information. Inaction produces stagnation. Failure rewards engagement by clarifying what must change. That clarity strengthens command over future behavior. Internal authority requires ownership of outcome regardless of circumstance. Failure removes the illusion that blame preserves self-worth. Blame weakens authority by shifting responsibility outward. Failure demands responsibility inward. That inward shift restores control over response and adjustment. Control over response is the essence of authority. Failure trains emotional containment by provoking frustration without collapse. Emotional containment allows action to continue uninterrupted. Uncontained emotion disrupts execution and decision quality. Failure provides repeated opportunities to practice containment. Each contained response strengthens composure under pressure. Composure stabilizes effort when stakes increase. Success amplifies composure if it already exists. Failure builds composure before amplification occurs. Internal authority also requires tolerance for self-disappointment. Failure introduces self-disappointment without escape. Avoiding that discomfort weakens authority. Remaining present strengthens it. Failure teaches presence by removing distractions of reward or praise. Presence improves precision and awareness during execution. Precision reduces wasted effort and accelerates learning. Failure sharpens awareness by highlighting consequence immediately. Immediate consequence reinforces learning faster than delayed reward. Failure accelerates learning cycles through repetition and correction. Learning, reinforced this way, becomes instinctive rather than intellectual. Instinctive competence reduces cognitive load during action. Reduced cognitive load improves consistency under fatigue. Failure also tests commitment to standards when enforcement feels inconvenient. Standards enforced selectively do not produce authority. Authority requires standards enforced consistently. Failure reveals where standards are flexible rather than fixed. Those flex points weaken structure. Correcting them strengthens reliability. Reliability reinforces trust in personal follow-through. That trust compounds into confidence rooted in behavior. Behavior-based confidence does not inflate or collapse easily. Failure removes reliance on emotional confidence entirely. Action taken without confidence proves authority exists regardless. That proof is internal and permanent. Failure builds authority by forcing accountability without audience. Accountability, practiced privately, transfers publicly when needed. Public accountability without private discipline collapses quickly. Failure builds discipline before exposure. Internal authority allows correction without self-attack. Self-attack weakens execution and prolongs recovery. Correction strengthens execution and shortens adjustment time. Failure trains correction as default response. Default responses define long-term trajectory. Failure shapes default responses toward responsibility and action. Internal authority reduces reliance on external structure. External structure supports, but cannot replace self-command. Failure ensures self-command is present before independence is required. Without internal authority, freedom becomes paralysis. Failure prepares the mind to handle freedom responsibly. Authority built through failure does not seek dominance or control over others. It maintains control over self regardless of environment. That control stabilizes effort through uncertainty. Uncertainty weakens those without authority. Failure conditions authority to function under uncertainty. Each failure faced deliberately strengthens command. Command earned this way cannot be revoked by circumstance. Failure is not disempowering when engaged correctly. Failure is the training ground where internal authority is forged. Without failure, authority remains theoretical. With failure, authority becomes operational. Chapter 6. Failure conditions consistency. Consistency is not created by inspiration, excitement, or belief in eventual reward. Consistency is conditioned through repeated action when outcome remains uncertain and effort feels unrewarded. Failure provides that conditioning environment relentlessly and without exception. Each failed attempt removes novelty and exposes whether action is habit or impulse. Impulse fades when effort becomes repetitive and emotionally neutral. Habit remains because it no longer depends on feeling. Failure strips away impulse-driven effort and leaves only what has been structurally reinforced. Structural reinforcement produces consistency that survives boredom, fatigue, and doubt. Consistency built this way does not feel heroic or dramatic. It feels ordinary, controlled, and unremarkable. That ordinariness is precisely what allows it to continue indefinitely. Failure demands repetition without reward. Repetition without reward builds tolerance for monotony. Monotony tolerance is essential for sustained progress. Most meaningful outcomes are the result of unglamorous repetition over extended time. Failure accelerates exposure to that reality early. Without failure, repetition feels optional. With failure, repetition becomes necessary. Necessity removes debate and reduces emotional resistance. Consistency strengthens when action becomes non-negotiable. Failure enforces non-negotiability by attaching consequence to inconsistency. Inconsistency produces predictable results. Failure makes those results immediate and visible. Visibility of consequence reinforces behavioral correction. Correction repeated daily becomes habit. Habit removes reliance on willpower. Willpower fluctuates. Habit persists. Failure exposes the unreliability of willpower quickly. That exposure forces the construction of routines that do not require motivation. Routine stabilizes effort under unpredictable conditions. Stability allows accumulation of progress even when performance varies. Failure teaches separation between performance and participation. Participation must continue regardless of performance quality. Without participation, improvement becomes impossible. Failure reinforces participation by punishing withdrawal. Withdrawal resets progress and increases a recovery cost. Failure makes that cost clear. Consistency also requires tolerance for imperfection. Failure normalizes imperfection by making it unavoidable. Attempting perfection undermines consistency by increasing hesitation. Failure removes perfectionism by proving imperfection is survivable. Survivability reduces fear of engagement. Reduced fear increases frequency of action. Frequency matters more than intensity for long-term development. Failure shifts focus from intensity to frequency. High intensity without consistency produces volatility. Moderate effort applied consistently produces compounding results. Failure reveals the limits of intensity-driven effort. That revelation redirects energy toward sustainable execution. Consistency also requires acceptance of slow progress. Failure introduces slow progress early and repeatedly. Acceptance prevents frustration-driven abandonment. Abandonment erases accumulated gains. Failure conditions persistence by making abandonment costly. Each return after failure strengthens persistence. Persistence transforms effort into identity. Identity built on persistence is difficult to disrupt. Failure also conditions time perspective. Short-term thinking collapses under repeated setback. Failure forces long-term orientation as the only viable strategy. Long-term orientation stabilizes decision-making. Stable decisions support consistent behavior. Consistency requires tolerance for unremarkable days. Failure creates many unremarkable days by removing immediate payoff. Those days build structural strength quietly. Failure conditions patience without optimism. Optimism fluctuates. Patience endures. Enduring patience sustains consistency through uncertainty. Failure also exposes inconsistency patterns. Patterns become visible when outcomes repeat. Failure highlights cause and effect without emotional cushioning. That clarity enables targeted correction. Correction strengthens routine. Routine reinforces consistency. Failure removes the illusion that breaks solve inconsistency. Breaks restore energy, but do not create discipline. Failure demands continuity rather than escape. Continuity preserves momentum. Momentum protects consistency during low output periods. Failure also conditions respect for process. Process adherence becomes the only controllable variable. Outcome fixation undermines consistency. Failure removes outcome fixation by making it unreliable. Focus returns to daily execution. Daily execution accumulates regardless of external validation. Failure teaches consistency through exposure, repetition, and consequence. That teaching is unforgiving but effective. Consistency built through failure does not depend on circumstance. It survives stress, distraction, and emotional depletion. Success later relies entirely on this consistency. Without it, progress collapses under scale. Failure ensures consistency exists before scale arrives. Consistency forged this way becomes automatic. Automatic behavior reduces cognitive strain. Reduced strain allows sustained output over time. Failure prepares the system for endurance. Endurance determines how far progress extends. Failure is not interruption. Failure is conditioning. Consistency is the result. Without failure, consistency remains aspirational. With failure, consistency becomes inevitable. Chapter 7. Failure removes emotional dependence. Emotional dependence quietly dictates behavior when decisions are allowed to follow feeling instead of standard. Failure interrupts that dependence by refusing to cooperate with preferred emotional states. Action taken only when feeling prepared collapses under repeated setback. Failure exposes that collapse quickly and without apology. Emotions fluctuate based on sleep, stress, environment, and expectation. Standards remain stable only when enforced independently of emotion. Failure trains separation between feeling and function through repeated discomfort. That separation restores control over behavior during emotional instability. Emotional dependence seeks relief before responsibility. Failure denies relief and demands responsibility anyway. That demand conditions maturity under pressure. Maturity is not emotional calm. It is behavioral reliability. Failure rewards reliability and punishes emotional negotiation. Negotiation delays action and weakens internal authority. Failure removes the option to negotiate with mood. Mood becomes irrelevant when consequence is immediate. Immediate consequence accelerates detachment from feeling. Detachment does not suppress emotion. It prevents emotion from leading. Failure teaches that emotion can exist without directing behavior. That lesson stabilizes execution during frustration, doubt, or discouragement. Emotional dependence also fuels overreaction to outcome. Failure disrupts overreaction by repeating disappointment until it normalizes. Normalization reduces intensity. Reduced intensity restores clarity. Clarity improves decision quality under pressure. Failure conditions clarity by overwhelming emotional expectation. Expectation collapses when failure repeats. What remains is realism and controlled effort. Emotional dependence often disguises itself as passion. Passion fades when effort becomes routine. Failure exposes whether commitment survives without excitement. Survival without excitement builds resilience. Resilience prevents withdrawal when novelty disappears. Failure also removes emotional attachment to image. Image preservation resists correction. Failure destroys image preservation by making error visible. Visibility forces correction instead of defense. Defense protects ego. Correction builds competence. Failure trains preference for correction over comfort. Comfort weakens adaptability. Adaptability sustains progress. Emotional dependence encourages avoidance of discomfort. Failure removes avoidance by making discomfort unavoidable. Unavoidable discomfort builds tolerance. Tolerance allows continuation without internal collapse. Failure also dismantles emotional dependency on praise. Praise is inconsistent and often delayed. Failure removes access to praise early. Early deprivation conditions independence from validation. Independence restores internal direction. Failure teaches that silence does not equal failure of effort. Effort continues regardless of response. That continuation stabilizes identity. Emotional dependence also drives comparison. Comparison amplifies discouragement when progress appears uneven. Failure redirects attention inward toward controllable behavior. Control reduces comparison. Reduced comparison preserves focus. Failure also conditions emotional endurance. Endurance allows emotion to pass without changing direction. Passing emotion without action change strengthens self-command. Failure repeats this process until it becomes automatic. Automatic control reduces emotional volatility. Reduced volatility improves consistency. Consistency accelerates development. Failure also exposes emotional shortcuts. Shortcuts prioritize feeling better over doing better. Failure blocks shortcuts by attaching consequence. Consequence redirects behavior toward discipline. Discipline enforced repeatedly becomes identity. Identity no longer negotiates with emotion. Failure removes emotional dependence by proving continuation is possible without relief. Relief is not required for progress. Progress requires action. Failure conditions action under emotional strain. That conditioning prepares the system for sustained success. Success amplifies emotion. Without prior detachment, amplification destabilizes. Failure ensures detachment exists before amplification. Emotional independence prevents collapse under recognition or pressure. Failure is not emotional damage. Failure is emotional training. Independence is the result. Without failure, emotional dependence persists. With failure, control is restored. Chapter 8. Failure strengthens focus. Focus deteriorates when attention is scattered between expectation, outcome, and emotional reaction. Failure removes excess focus demands by collapsing expectation repeatedly. When expectation collapses, attention returns to controllable action. Failure trains focus by narrowing attention to execution instead of outcome. Outcome fixation fractures concentration and drains cognitive resources. Failure disrupts outcome fixation by making prediction unreliable. Unreliable prediction forces presence. Presence stabilizes focus under pressure. Failure demands presence because correction must occur immediately. Delayed correction compounds error. Failure highlights that cost clearly. Focus strengthens when attention is consistently redirected toward correction. Correction sharpens awareness of detail. Detail awareness improves precision. Precision reduces wasted effort. Failure repeatedly exposes wasted effort. Exposure conditions refinement. Refinement improves efficiency. Efficiency preserves energy during prolonged engagement. Failure also trains resistance to distraction. Distraction thrives when progress feels uncertain. Failure normalizes uncertainty. Normalization reduces the urge to escape. Reduced escape improves sustained attention. Failure conditions acceptance of incomplete information. Incomplete information demands focus on process. Process focus limits mental wandering. Failure removes the illusion that multitasking accelerates progress. Multitasking fragments attention. Failure punishes fragmentation through degraded outcome. Degradation reinforces single-task engagement. Single-task engagement strengthens depth of focus. Depth produces mastery over time. Failure also dismantles comparison-driven distraction. Comparison redirects attention away from execution. Failure redirects attention back to immediate correction. Immediate correction sustains momentum. Failure teaches prioritization by making consequences visible. Visible consequence clarifies what matters. Clarity reduces cognitive overload. Reduced overload enhances concentration. Failure also strengthens tolerance for mental fatigue. Mental fatigue weakens focus. Failure forces continuation despite fatigue. Continuation builds endurance. Endurance stabilizes attention over longer periods. Failure conditions disciplined breaks rather than impulsive escape. Escape fragments focus. Structured pause restores it. Failure teaches when to pause and when to persist. That judgment improves attentional control. Failure also exposes emotional distraction. Emotional rumination steals focus. Failure interrupts rumination by requiring action. Action grounds attention in reality. Grounded attention improves task quality. Failure strengthens the ability to re-engage quickly. Disengagement happens. Re-engagement determines progress. Failure demands rapid re-engagement after setback. Repeated re-engagement builds attentional resilience. Resilience protects focus under disruption. Failure also reduces overplanning. Overplanning disperses focus across hypothetical outcomes. Failure collapses hypotheticals. Action replaces speculation. Action-focused attention sustains momentum. Failure teaches sequencing. Correct sequence prevents overwhelm. Failure exposes poor sequencing immediately. Correction refines order of execution. Refined sequence improves flow. Flow stabilizes focus. Failure also conditions acceptance of unfinished work. Unfinished work creates cognitive tension. Failure teaches continuation without resolution. Continuation preserves focus across sessions. Failure removes attachment to perfect focus. Perfect focus is rare. Functional focus is sufficient. Failure trains functioning under imperfect conditions. That training produces reliability. Reliability maintains focus through noise. Failure also strengthens boundary setting. Boundaries protect attention. Failure exposes where boundaries are weak. Correction reinforces them. Reinforced boundaries sustain concentration. Failure reduces reactivity to interruption. Reactivity fragments attention. Failure normalizes interruption. Normalization restores composure. Composure protects focus. Failure trains attention recovery. Recovery speed matters more than initial loss. Failure improves recovery speed through repetition. Fast recovery sustains output. Failure also conditions tolerance for silence. Silence removes stimulation. Failure demands work without stimulation. That demand strengthens internal focus generation. Internally generated focus is durable. Durable focus sustains long-term execution. Failure is not distraction. Failure is a focusing mechanism. Without failure, attention remains scattered. With failure, focus becomes sharp and controllable. Chapter 9. Failure builds resilience without drama. Resilience is often misunderstood as emotional toughness or visible strength under pressure. In reality, resilience is quiet continuation without negotiation when conditions deteriorate. Failure creates those deteriorating conditions repeatedly and without warning. Each encounter trains the system to remain operational instead of reactive. Reaction wastes energy and fragments direction. Continuation preserves structure and momentum. Failure teaches continuation by removing the option of comfort. Comfort delays resilience. Repeated failure removes expectation of ease. When ease is no longer expected, resistance loses its power. Failure also removes the need for dramatic recovery. Drama amplifies setback and prolongs interruption. Failure normalizes interruption. Normalization shortens recovery time. Short recovery preserves forward motion. Failure trains tolerance for repeated disruption. Disruption without collapse is the core of resilience. Collapse occurs when expectation is violated. Failure eliminates unrealistic expectation. Expectation removed, response stabilizes. Failure conditions emotional neutrality toward difficulty. Neutrality preserves decision quality. Decision quality determines long-term outcome. Failure also trains physical and mental pacing. Overexertion accelerates burnout. Failure exposes unsustainable pace. Correction refines effort distribution. Refined pacing supports endurance. Endurance allows persistence beyond initial capacity. Failure strengthens resilience by enforcing realistic engagement. Resilience also requires tolerance for unresolved tension. Failure introduces unresolved tension regularly. Remaining active despite tension builds capacity. Capacity expands quietly. Failure trains patience under strain. Strain without patience produces withdrawal. Failure punishes withdrawal immediately. Immediate consequence reinforces endurance. Failure also builds resilience by removing the need for reassurance. Reassurance creates dependency. Failure provides none. Absence of reassurance forces self-reliance. Self-reliance stabilizes effort under uncertainty. Failure trains recovery without explanation. Explanation delays action. Action restores momentum. Failure conditions swift return rather than prolonged reflection. Reflection without movement weakens resilience. Failure demands movement. Movement preserves identity. Resilience strengthens when identity remains intact under pressure. Failure tests identity repeatedly. Each continuation reinforces it. Failure also conditions acceptance of loss. Loss without acceptance drains energy. Failure forces acceptance through repetition. Acceptance redirects energy toward adjustment. Adjustment restores progress. Failure trains adjustment as default response. Default responses determine resilience. Failure also removes the illusion that strength feels powerful. Strength often feels controlled and restrained. Failure teaches functioning without emotional intensity. That lesson prevents burnout. Failure builds resilience by separating effort from mood. Mood fluctuates. Effort must remain. Failure enforces that separation. Resilience also requires trust in process. Failure undermines superficial trust. Only tested trust remains. Tested trust supports long-term engagement. Failure strengthens trust through repeated exposure. Failure also conditions tolerance for uncertainty. Uncertainty destabilizes the untrained. Failure trains stability under uncertainty. Stability preserves direction. Failure teaches resilience without narrative. Narrative distracts. Action grounds. Failure grounds effort in action. Failure also removes comparison-driven discouragement. Comparison exaggerates difficulty. Failure redirects focus inward. Internal focus strengthens resolve. Failure trains resilience through repetition, not inspiration. Inspiration fades. Conditioning remains. Resilience built this way does not announce itself. It simply continues. Failure is not a dramatic test. Failure is daily training. Without failure, resilience remains theoretical. With failure, resilience becomes operational. Chapter 10. Failure prepares responsibility. Responsibility expands faster than confidence, clarity, or emotional readiness. Failure prepares for that expansion by forcing ownership before comfort arrives. Ownership without success trains accountability without reward. That training is essential because responsibility rarely provides immediate reinforcement. Failure removes the illusion that readiness precedes obligation. Obligation arrives regardless of preparation. Failure accelerates preparation by demanding response without delay. Delay compounds consequence when responsibility increases. Failure exposes that cost early. Responsibility requires decision-making under incomplete information. Failure conditions that requirement repeatedly. Each setback demands choice without certainty. Choice made repeatedly sharpens judgment. Judgment improves with exposure, not theory. Failure provides exposure consistently. Responsibility also requires tolerance for consequence. Failure introduces consequence without insulation. Insulation weakens learning. Failure removes insulation. Consequence clarifies cause and effect. Clarity strengthens accountability. Failure also trains prioritization. Responsibility multiplies demands. Failure forces selection. Selection improves focus. Focus preserves energy. Energy preservation sustains execution. Failure teaches that responsibility is carried through action, not explanation. Explanation diffuses ownership. Action reinforces it. Failure also removes dependence on permission. Responsibility does not wait for approval. Failure demands initiative. Initiative restores control. Control stabilizes direction. Failure conditions tolerance for visibility. Visibility amplifies error. Failure normalizes error under exposure. Normalization prevents paralysis. Responsibility also requires emotional containment. Failure trains containment through repeated disappointment. Disappointment handled without withdrawal strengthens leadership capacity. Leadership begins with self-management. Failure enforces self-management daily. Responsibility demands consistency despite variable outcome. Failure removes outcome predictability. Consistency remains the only controllable factor. Failure reinforces commitment to consistency. Responsibility also requires alignment between word and behavior. Failure exposes misalignment quickly. Correction restores integrity. Integrity stabilizes authority. Failure also teaches boundary enforcement. Responsibility without boundaries collapses. Failure reveals where boundaries fail. Correction strengthens them. Responsibility requires endurance under scrutiny. Failure introduces scrutiny early. Early exposure builds tolerance. Tolerance prevents defensive reaction. Failure also conditions patience with complexity. Complexity increases with responsibility. Failure trains navigation without simplification. Responsibility requires acceptance of trade-offs. Failure forces trade-offs without ideal options. Acceptance improves decisiveness. Failure teaches decisive action under constraint. Constraint mirrors real responsibility. Responsibility also demands reliability. Failure punishes inconsistency. Punishment reinforces reliability. Reliability builds trust. Trust increases responsibility. Failure prepares for that cycle. Responsibility amplifies weakness. Failure exposes weakness before amplification. Early exposure prevents later collapse. Failure also teaches recovery after error. Error under responsibility carries weight. Failure conditions recovery without excuse. Excuse erodes credibility. Action restores it. Responsibility requires sustained engagement. Failure conditions sustained engagement without recognition. Recognition cannot be guaranteed. Failure removes dependency on it. Responsibility also requires emotional neutrality toward outcome. Failure normalizes unpredictable outcome. Neutrality stabilizes execution. Failure prepares responsibility by removing illusion, insulation, and delay. Without failure, responsibility overwhelms. With failure, responsibility becomes manageable. Failure is not avoidance of responsibility. Failure is responsibility training. Responsibility survives because failure prepared it. Chapter 11. Failure refines identity. Identity is not what is believed internally, but what behavior repeatedly proves under pressure. Failure applies that pressure consistently, removing imagined identity and exposing actual patterns. Imagined identity collapses when effort becomes inconvenient or unrewarded. Actual identity reveals itself through continuation or withdrawal. Failure accelerates this revelation by reducing comfort and certainty. Reduced comfort eliminates performance based on mood. What remains is behavior anchored to discipline. Failure refines identity by demanding alignment between self-image and action. Misalignment becomes visible when effort stops after setback. Visibility forces correction or acceptance of truth. Correction strengthens identity. Avoidance weakens it. Failure removes ambiguity about commitment. Commitment is proven only through persistence without reward. Failure provides repeated opportunities for that proof. Each continuation reinforces identity as someone who follows through. Follow-through becomes expectation. Expectation stabilizes future behavior. Failure also strips identity built on comparison. Comparison-based identity fractures under uneven progress. Failure redirects attention inward toward standards. Standards-based identity endures external fluctuation. Failure conditions loyalty to standards over emotion. Loyalty strengthens self-respect. Self-respect reinforces discipline. Failure also refines identity by exposing excuses. Excuses preserve image but erode credibility. Failure punishes excuse-making through consequence. Consequence demands ownership. Ownership strengthens identity integrity. Failure teaches acceptance of imperfect performance without abandoning effort. That acceptance prevents identity collapse after error. Identity built this way tolerates correction. Tolerance accelerates development. Failure also removes identity attached to outcome. Outcome-based identity fluctuates uncontrollably. Failure detaches self-worth from result. Detachment stabilizes effort. Failure conditions pride in execution rather than success. Execution pride sustains effort during slow progress. Failure also exposes whether identity is conditional. Conditional identity depends on comfort. Failure removes comfort. Only unconditional identity remains. Unconditional identity supports long-term growth. Failure refines identity by enforcing consistency across conditions. Consistency becomes self-definition. Failure also dismantles victim-based identity. Victim identity externalizes control. Failure demands internal response. Internal response restores agency. Agency strengthens identity coherence. Failure trains response-based identity. Response matters more than circumstance. Failure repeats this lesson until internalized. Failure also exposes avoidance patterns. Patterns once hidden become predictable. Predictability allows intervention. Intervention changes identity trajectory. Failure also refines identity by normalizing effort without recognition. Recognition-based identity collapses in silence. Failure builds identity independent of audience. That independence sustains effort privately. Failure conditions patience with self-development. Identity does not transform instantly. Failure enforces gradual change. Gradual change produces durability. Failure also removes identity built on potential. Potential untested is meaningless. Failure demands proof through action. Proof replaces speculation. Failure refines identity through repetition, correction, and ownership. Each repetition strengthens alignment. Alignment stabilizes behavior. Failure does not attack identity. Failure clarifies it. Clarified identity supports reliable execution. Without failure, identity remains theoretical. With failure, identity becomes functional. Chapter 12. Failure builds execution without motivation. Motivation is unstable, unpredictable, and unreliable under sustained pressure and repeated difficulty. Failure removes dependence on motivation by making action necessary despite emotional resistance. When motivation disappears, systems either collapse or reveal their strength. Failure exists to reveal which system has been built. Action taken without motivation is the purest form of execution. Failure trains this capacity through repeated demand without emotional reward. Each setback reduces reliance on feeling ready. Readiness becomes irrelevant when continuation is required. Failure teaches movement before confidence. Confidence often arrives after action, not before it. Failure enforces this sequence repeatedly. Execution without motivation strengthens discipline directly. Discipline replaces enthusiasm as the primary driver. Failure removes the illusion that energy precedes effort. Effort generates energy when sustained. Failure conditions this reversal through necessity. Execution becomes mechanical rather than emotional. Mechanical execution survives fluctuation. Failure also dismantles waiting behavior. Waiting is disguised avoidance. Failure punishes waiting through stagnation. Movement becomes the only viable response. Failure narrows choices to act or deteriorate. This clarity removes negotiation. Failure also conditions tolerance for discomfort. Discomfort no longer signals danger. It signals normal operation. Failure repeats this exposure until resistance weakens. Weakened resistance lowers activation threshold. Lower threshold increases consistency. Failure also removes dependence on external validation. Validation-dependent execution collapses in isolation. Failure provides long periods without acknowledgement. Execution continues or identity dissolves. Continuation strengthens internal authority. Failure builds trust in self-command. Self-command replaces encouragement. Failure also trains focus under fatigue. Fatigue normally reduces precision. Failure demands precision regardless. Repeated demand sharpens attention. Attention becomes disciplined rather than reactive. Failure also exposes inefficient effort. Wasted motion becomes obvious under strain. Failure forces refinement. Refinement improves output without increased energy. Failure also normalizes slow progress. Speed obsession collapses under repeated failure. Consistency replaces urgency. Consistency sustains long-term execution. Failure removes dramatic thinking. Drama consumes energy without producing output. Failure rewards quiet continuation. Quiet continuation compounds over time. Failure also conditions obedience to process. Process obedience removes emotional debate. Debate wastes time. Failure eliminates debate through consequence. Failure trains execution when progress feels invisible. Invisible progress still accumulates. Failure teaches patience with accumulation. Failure also reveals the cost of stopping. Stopping resets adaptation. Failure makes this cost undeniable. Continuation becomes the rational choice. Failure builds execution habits independent of mood. Mood becomes irrelevant. Relevance shifts to action. Failure also teaches respect for small actions. Small actions repeated outperform sporadic intensity. Failure enforces repetition. Repetition builds reliability. Failure also removes the need for inspiration. Inspiration is occasional. Execution must be constant. Failure ensures this distinction is learned. Failure builds an operator mindset. Operators execute regardless of conditions. Failure trains this identity through repetition. Failure does not make execution easier. Failure makes execution automatic. Automatic execution sustains progress when motivation is absent. This is how failure becomes an asset rather than an obstacle. Chapter 13. Failure maps the path forward. Failure functions as a directional system rather than a verdict on capability or future outcome. Each failure removes one incorrect approach, narrowing movement toward what actually works. Success rarely appears through sudden insight. It emerges through subtraction of ineffective behavior. Failure performs that subtraction with precision. Repeated failure refines direction by exposing false assumptions. Assumptions collapse under consequence. What remains is reality. Reality provides usable information. Failure forces attention onto controllable variables. Uncontrollable factors lose relevance. Focus sharpens around effort, timing, and adjustment. Failure also reveals sequence. Attempting steps out of order produces resistance. Failure highlights correct order through friction. Friction signals misalignment. Alignment reduces friction. Failure teaches this relationship through repetition. Repeated failure builds pattern recognition. Patterns replace guessing. Guessing wastes energy. Failure conserves energy by eliminating uncertainty. Each failure compresses the search space. Compression accelerates progress. Failure also reveals capacity limits. Limits are not permanent. They indicate where training is required. Failure directs training effort efficiently. Efficiency increases return on effort. Failure also clarifies priorities. Non-essential actions collapse first. Essential actions remain. Failure exposes which actions matter. Matter dictates focus. Failure removes distractions disguised as progress. Busyness collapses under pressure. Only output survives. Failure trains output-centered execution. Failure also exposes timing errors. Action taken too early collapses. Action taken too late collapses. Failure calibrates timing through consequence. Calibration improves precision. Precision compounds over time. Failure also teaches risk assessment. Avoidance limits growth. Recklessness destroys momentum. Failure marks the boundary between them. Boundaries guide decision-making. Failure also reveals durability requirements. Short-term effort fails under sustained demand. Failure forces endurance development. Endurance sustains success. Failure also dismantles fantasy-based goals. Fantasy ignores process. Failure enforces process orientation. Process orientation creates repeatable success. Failure teaches adaptation speed. Slow adaptation repeats failure. Rapid adaptation converts failure into progress. Failure rewards responsiveness. Failure also exposes emotional interference. Emotion clouds judgment. Failure punishes emotional decisions. Punishment reinforces objectivity. Objectivity improves outcomes. Failure clarifies feedback loops. Feedback ignored repeats mistakes. Failure amplifies feedback until acknowledged. Acknowledgement enables correction. Correction advances position. Failure also identifies structural weaknesses. Weak structures collapse under stress. Failure forces reinforcement. Reinforcement increases load capacity. Failure also maps resilience thresholds. Thresholds expand through exposure. Failure provides exposure. Exposure builds tolerance. Tolerance supports sustained effort. Failure teaches patience with iteration. Iteration replaces perfection. Perfection stalls action. Failure removes perfectionism through consequence. Failure also reveals alignment between effort and goal. Misaligned effort dissipates. Failure redirects effort toward alignment. Alignment multiplies effectiveness. Failure does not conceal the path. Failure illuminates it. Multiple failures refine the map. Refined maps reduce wasted movement. Reduced waste accelerates arrival. Failure becomes a navigational asset. Those who learn from failure move forward deliberately. Those who resist failure wander aimlessly. The difference determines outcome. Failure is not a detour. Failure is the roadmap to success. Chapter 14. Failure trains long-term thinking. Short-term thinking collapses quickly under repeated resistance and delayed reward. Failure exists to destroy short-term thinking by making impatience costly. Immediate relief becomes unavailable. Only sustained effort remains viable. Failure forces attention beyond momentary discomfort toward long-range consequence. Consequence accumulates slowly but decisively. Failure teaches respect for accumulation. Every repeated action compounds, whether constructive or destructive. Failure exposes this truth without negotiation. Short-term comfort trades future capacity for present ease. Failure highlights this trade through loss. Loss sharpens awareness of time horizons. Awareness restructures decision-making. Failure trains patience by denying instant payoff. Patience becomes operational rather than theoretical. Operational patience sustains consistent effort. Failure also removes urgency addiction. Urgency creates frantic movement without direction. Failure slows the process deliberately. Slowness reveals structure. Structure supports durability. Failure forces planning beyond immediate emotion. Emotion prioritizes relief. Failure prioritizes results. Results require sequencing, pacing, and restraint. Failure enforces these disciplines repeatedly. Failure also conditions delayed gratification. Gratification postponed strengthens impulse control. Impulse control stabilizes execution. Failure strengthens this muscle through repetition. Failure also reframes progress measurement. Visible wins disappear. Invisible gains accumulate. Failure trains recognition of subtle improvement. Recognition sustains effort across long spans. Failure also exposes the cost of inconsistency. Inconsistency resets progress repeatedly. Failure makes resets painful. Pain encourages continuity. Failure teaches investment thinking. Effort becomes capital. Capital compounds with time. Failure punishes withdrawal before compounding matures. Failure also develops strategic restraint. Not every opportunity deserves action. Failure teaches selection through consequence. Selection preserves energy. Preserved energy supports longevity. Failure also trains horizon expansion. Short horizons amplify frustration. Long horizons absorb setbacks. Failure expands perspective through necessity. Perspective stabilizes behavior. Failure conditions tolerance for slow feedback. Slow feedback frustrates impatient systems. Failure forces adaptation. Adapted systems endure. Failure also dismantles impulsive decision cycles. Impulse seeks immediate resolution. Failure delays resolution deliberately. Delay encourages reflection. Reflection improves strategic alignment. Failure teaches pacing. Excessive speed collapses under complexity. Failure enforces measured progress. Measured progress survives scale. Failure also reveals cumulative advantage. Small advantages repeated outperform dramatic effort. Failure enforces repetition over intensity. Repetition builds inevitability. Failure conditions endurance across months and years. Endurance separates transient effort from lasting success. Failure also reshapes identity toward builder rather than sprinter. Builders think long-term. Failure trains builder mentality. Failure removes fantasy timelines. Fantasy collapses under delay. Failure replaces fantasy with realism. Realism improves planning accuracy. Failure also reinforces responsibility for future self. Future cost becomes visible. Visibility influences present action. Failure connects present discipline with future stability. Failure trains respect for process duration. Duration cannot be rushed. Failure enforces this truth repeatedly. Failure does not waste time. Failure teaches how time must be used. Long-term thinking transforms failure into leverage. Leverage accelerates sustainable success. Chapter 15. Failure builds quiet confidence. Confidence built on praise collapses when silence replaces approval. Failure removes applause and replaces it with long stretches of unobserved effort. That environment exposes whether confidence is real or borrowed. Borrowed confidence requires reinforcement. Failure withdraws reinforcement. What survives becomes stable. Quiet confidence does not announce itself or seek confirmation. It operates without display. Failure trains this silence deliberately. Repeated failure strips the desire to prove worth publicly. Proof becomes internal. Internal proof stabilizes behavior. Failure teaches reliance on execution rather than affirmation. Affirmation fluctuates. Execution remains available. Failure makes this distinction unavoidable. Confidence grounded in execution persists through uncertainty. Failure reinforces trust in preparation. Preparation accumulated quietly becomes dependable. Failure rewards preparation when pressure increases. Pressure exposes gaps immediately. Failure highlights gaps without judgment. Correction follows naturally. Correction strengthens confidence through capability. Failure also removes comparison-driven confidence. Comparison depends on visibility and context. Failure operates privately. Private effort eliminates comparison. Confidence becomes self-referenced. Self-referenced confidence remains intact regardless of others' progress. Failure conditions calm response to setback. Calm preserves clarity. Clarity supports adjustment. Adjustment restores momentum. Failure also teaches emotional neutrality. Neutrality prevents overreaction. Overreaction wastes energy. Failure enforces measured response. Measured response builds composure. Composure signals confidence internally. Failure also trains confidence under incomplete information. Certainty rarely exists. Failure requires action, despite uncertainty. Action builds experiential knowledge. Knowledge increases confidence legitimately. Failure also removes bravado. Bravado collapses under consequence. Failure exposes performance gaps immediately. Exposure forces humility. Humility accelerates learning. Learning strengthens confidence authentically. Failure also builds confidence independent of outcome. Outcome-based confidence fluctuates. Failure disconnects confidence from result. Confidence anchors to effort quality. Effort quality remains controllable. Failure also teaches trust in recovery. Recovery from failure proves resilience. Resilience reinforces confidence. Failure repeats this cycle until internalized. Failure also removes fear of embarrassment. Embarrassment loses power through exposure. Failure normalizes imperfection. Normalization reduces hesitation. Reduced hesitation increases decisive action. Failure trains steady presence under scrutiny. Scrutiny intensifies discomfort. Failure conditions tolerance. Tolerance stabilizes performance. Failure also develops confidence through consistency. Consistency builds predictability. Predictability reduces anxiety. Reduced anxiety supports focus. Failure also reshapes confidence timeline. Confidence no longer precedes action. Action precedes confidence. Failure enforces this sequence repeatedly. Failure also builds confidence in restraint. Not reacting impulsively requires strength. Failure teaches restraint through consequence. Restraint protects long-term positioning. Failure conditions patience with self-progress. Progress rarely feels dramatic. Failure removes expectation of drama. Confidence becomes quiet certainty. Failure does not inflate ego. Failure grounds confidence in capability. Grounded confidence endures pressure. This is confidence refined, not imagined. Chapter 16. Failure builds emotional control. Emotional instability collapses execution long before skill or intelligence ever fails. Failure exists to expose emotional volatility and force regulation through repeated consequence. Unregulated emotion distorts judgment. Distorted judgment produces repeated error. Failure punishes this cycle until correction occurs. Correction begins with awareness. Failure creates awareness by amplifying reaction cost. Cost makes emotion visible. Visibility allows control. Failure teaches separation between stimulus and response. Stimulus is unavoidable. Response remains selectable. Failure reinforces this distinction relentlessly. Each setback becomes a test of response discipline. Repeated testing strengthens control. Failure also dismantles emotional entitlement. Entitlement expects ease. Failure delivers resistance. Resistance exposes entitlement immediately. Exposure forces adjustment. Adjustment restores operational control. Failure trains tolerance for frustration. Frustration normally triggers impulsive reaction. Failure punishes impulse. Punishment conditions restraint. Restraint preserves energy. Preserved energy improves focus. Failure also reduces emotional exaggeration. Small setbacks feel catastrophic when emotion dominates. Failure normalizes setback frequency. Normalization shrinks emotional spikes. Smaller spikes preserve clarity. Failure also conditions emotional recovery speed. Lingering emotion delays action. Failure makes delay costly. Cost incentivizes rapid recovery. Recovery becomes habitual. Failure trains neutrality under criticism. Criticism activates defense. Failure punishes defensiveness through stagnation. Acceptance enables correction. Correction advances capability. Failure also teaches emotional containment. Expression without control spreads instability. Failure isolates effort. Isolation reduces emotional contagion. Contained emotion supports precision. Failure conditions response over reaction. Reaction is automatic. Response is chosen. Failure rewards choice. Failure also removes mood-based decision-making. Mood fluctuates unpredictably. Failure demands consistency regardless. Consistency overrides mood. Failure reinforces command over internal state. Internal command stabilizes performance. Failure also trains emotional endurance. Pressure sustained over time reveals weakness. Failure provides sustained pressure. Endurance expands through exposure. Failure also dismantles emotional avoidance. Avoidance delays confrontation. Failure forces confrontation. Confrontation builds tolerance. Tolerance strengthens regulation. Failure also teaches patience with discomfort. Discomfort loses urgency through repetition. Urgency diminishes, control increases. Failure conditions composure under uncertainty. Uncertainty triggers anxiety. Failure enforces action anyway. Action reduces anxiety through engagement. Failure also builds emotional predictability. Predictability reduces volatility. Reduced volatility improves decision accuracy. Failure also removes dependence on emotional support. Support absence exposes self-regulation gaps. Failure fills those gaps through necessity. Necessity accelerates learning. Failure also trains emotional discipline during success. Success inflates emotion. Inflation precedes collapse. Failure prevents inflation through memory. Memory enforces restraint. Failure builds emotional authority. Authority replaces reactivity. Failure does not numb emotion. Failure organizes emotion. Organized emotion becomes fuel rather than interference. This control is earned, not imagined. Chapter 17. Failure conditions relentless focus. Focus collapses when attention is scattered by comfort, novelty, or emotional fluctuation. Failure removes these distractions by narrowing the field to what directly affects outcome. Under failure, unnecessary concerns lose relevance. Only controllable actions remain. Failure trains attention to remain anchored to execution. Anchored attention resists interruption. Interruption weakens momentum. Failure exposes the cost of distraction immediately. Cost restores discipline. Failure also dismantles multitasking illusions. Divided attention fragments output. Failure punishes fragmentation through error. Error demands correction. Correction simplifies focus. Failure also reduces mental noise. Noise thrives in comfort. Failure removes comfort. Silence emerges. Silence clarifies priority. Failure conditions presence. Presence improves precision. Precision compounds effectiveness. Failure also teaches sequencing of attention. Wrong focus at the wrong time wastes effort. Failure reveals sequence through resistance. Resistance redirects attention. Redirection improves alignment. Failure narrows objectives. Excess goals dilute effort. Failure collapses options. Collapsed options sharpen commitment. Failure also trains sustained concentration. Short bursts collapse under long demand. Failure extends demand deliberately. Extension builds endurance. Endurance sustains focus. Failure conditions attention under fatigue. Fatigue tempts disengagement. Failure demands continuation. Continuation strengthens mental stamina. Failure also removes urgency-driven distraction. Urgency scatters attention. Failure enforces pacing. Pacing preserves clarity. Failure teaches tolerance for monotony. Monotony repels novelty-seeking behavior. Failure removes novelty. Focus deepens. Failure also exposes avoidance disguised as distraction. Distraction delays confrontation. Failure forces confrontation. Confrontation anchors attention. Failure conditions task immersion. Immersion eliminates rumination. Rumination wastes energy. Failure rewards immersion through progress. Failure also builds attentional discipline. Discipline restricts attention intentionally. Restriction increases effectiveness. Failure enforces attentional boundaries. Boundaries protect momentum. Failure trains focus without external stimulation. Stimulation fades. Focus must persist. Failure enforces this requirement. Failure also refines goal clarity. Vague goals scatter attention. Failure punishes vagueness. Clarity emerges. Clarity directs effort. Failure conditions rapid refocusing after disruption. Disruption is inevitable. Failure penalizes prolonged drift. Recovery speed increases. Failure also teaches selective attention. Not everything deserves response. Failure reveals irrelevance through consequence. Irrelevance is ignored. Failure trains mental stillness. Stillness stabilizes cognition. Stable cognition improves decision accuracy. Failure also removes overconsumption. Consumption distracts from production. Failure enforces production. Production sustains progress. Failure builds focus independent of environment. Environment fluctuates. Focus remains. Failure does not broaden attention. Failure sharpens it. Sharpened focus accelerates execution under pressure.